Hey everybody, welcome to the world's worst diabetes mom. That's me. I'm Stacey Sims, and I'm going to teach you today how to be more worst. If that sounds a little weird, stay with me. You'll understand what I'm talking about. First, if you're not familiar, just a quick little bit. So I'm a mom of a kid with type 1. My son Benny was diagnosed right before he turned 2 back in 2006. I'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. And like you, we're all trying to figure out what to do in this wild and unprecedented time. So this presentation was created for when we could, wander out of our homes and things were more normal. But I'm going to try to use the ideas and things that I talk about here to maybe apply to what we're going through right now. But this will not last, and you will be able to go back into the world. We'll all be able to see each other again in person, not just on Zoom. And please, I hope I'm doing this right. But I hope it helps a little bit. So let's go ahead and get started. All right. So this is the world's worst diabetes mom, a time where we talk about not just learning from mistakes, but embracing those mistakes, because I really feel that we need to make more mistakes, and you'll learn why. So this is our diagnosis story. That is my son, Benny, right before he was diagnosed in December of 2006. He was 23 months old. We are baking something, and I don't know why he is on the table. I promise we did not let those little baby feet get into the cookies or whatever we were making. But the other slide is my brother-in-law, David. And boy, he always hates when I show this, but to me, it just sums up life before. This is just a few days before Benny's diagnosis when, you know the signs, right? He was so thirsty all the time. And of course, he gave him a big glass of orange juice because we were all out at IHOP. It was a family thing. This is like the day or two after Thanksgiving that year. We were all dressed in brown and white and blue for family photos. That's my daughter Leah's hair there in the forefront. And boy, yeah, that was not the right thing to give him. But like you, who knew? So this is us, what we looked like at our first diabetes walk. This is just a few months after diagnosis. And Benny is now, 2 in a couple of weeks, and my daughter Leah is 5. This is at our JDRF walk at Carowinds. We are in the Charlotte area. A little bit about me. I started a blog called Off the Dial. That was in early 2007. I was working for a radio station at the time, WBT. My background is in broadcasting. I was a TV anchor and reporter for many years. And then I started on the radio, did that for a decade, left that job, 6-7 years ago now, started Diabetes Connections, a weekly podcast in 2015. And all along, I just really like talking to people who live with type 1. You can see in that big picture, that is me with a Zoom recorder. No, not a Zoom recorder. What were they called? It's like a little MP3, MP4 recorder. Gosh, I can't remember the name. But I was interviewing a family at this school, and there are 4 kids, 3 of whom have type 1. And they were doing a big fundraiser. They were one of the big JDRF families in our area. So that was a lot of fun. And now I'm hung up on the name of that dumb orange recorder. But that doesn't matter. All right, so when I say the world's worst diabetes mom, what am I really talking about here? Let's just step back and set some parameters. Because those of you who know me know that I'm not really talking about the worst in terms of health issues, right? I mean, we're really talking here about things that we all say. Many of us say, oh, I'm the worst. I did this so poorly, or I messed this up. I must be the world's worst mom. And sometimes we do feel that way if we admit it, that we're not measuring up. So let me just set some parameters. Like I said, this is Benny now. He is 15. That is my daughter, Leah, in the picture with him. And he's doing great. If you listen to the show or you're more familiar with me on social media, I never share specific numbers. I don't think anybody should be sharing specific numbers about somebody else in diabetes land. So I stopped sharing Benny's A1C a very long time ago, probably when he was 7. And I do post graphs here and there if we're talking about a point. Now, I guess I should amend that. I think you should not mindlessly share numbers, right? Sometimes there are ways to do that and reasons to do it. But all of that to say, Benny's doing great. He's where our endocrinologist thinks he should be. He's happy, he's healthy, he's very independent. So this is him as Rufus. He is He used to be super connected with JDRF, like most little kids are. Then they grow up and become teens and don't want as much to do with it, and that's totally normal. But he has kind of jumped back in as Rufus, which has been amazing and really fun to see. This is him at summer camp or diabetes camp last year, having a great time. And this is the kids, gosh, it's like a year ago on our spring break last year. We did a road trip. We flew out to San Francisco. We live on the East Coast. And then we drove up to Seattle, where we ended up with the Children with Diabetes conference in Seattle. But it was a dream of mine to go to the Redwood Forest. And that's where we are here. The kids are inside a tree. It was such a great trip. But Benny is doing very well health-wise. And I have focused his whole life with diabetes on independence and responsibility because I want both of my kids to grow up and get the heck out of my house. I am not kidding. I'm focusing on how are they going to do this without me? And it really has helped guide me every step of the way. So I show these beautiful pictures because I have a photo sharing service. I don't know what you call it, but I use it for a lot of my diabetes graphics, Diabetes Connections graphics for the podcast. And this is what came up when I searched family. Isn't that nice? Look at all that sunshine and everything else and the smooching and the hugs, or maybe they're having a nice talk, that mom and daughter. But I thought it was funny because when you search family, you know what doesn't come up? People yelling at each other, kids barfing on you, all the laundry that has to be done, right? I mean, that kind of stuff never shows up in these searches. And that's not the whole picture when it comes to family and parenting, right? It's hard. It's stressful. It can stink. I mean, it's just difficult. And with diabetes, we have another layer of that. We have the A1C every 3 months. Now, who here in this audience, and when I do this at conferences, I get a reaction, so we'll see if you're home alone watching this. You know, who has ever heard of the A1C described as mommy's report card? You know, or have you thought about it that way yourself? I think there's a lot of guilt and a lot of feelings that go into that. And we can say all the time, oh, it's just a number, it's just a number. But then sometimes it feels like it's a lot more. And with technology the way it is, we can now experience that guilt and those feelings if you do assign those to numbers, and a lot of us do, right? We can get that assigned a lot more often. What am I talking about? Well, this is how you feel when you're getting your A1C, right? Hello. I love her face. She's like, what? Well, now with CGM, you can get that every 5 minutes. And I love CGM. We're a huge proponent of it. Benny's worn a Dexcom since he was 9 years old. But sometimes seeing all of the numbers all of the time, while incredibly helpful for diabetes management, isn't the best for your emotional state. So what do we do about it? And I want to talk for a moment here about, well, let me go ahead. Yeah, all right, because this presentation is hard to do without seeing what's coming next. I have this set up kind of weird. So before I get into the world's worst stuff, we need to talk about how you can be confident enough to be the worst. And I know that might sound kind of funny, but what I mean is you need confidence to take the emotion away from those numbers. You need to have a really good baseline with your kids and communication in order to be comfortable enough with diabetes to make mistakes. And I don't mean to make mistakes like, you know, you don't give insulin for 3 days, or, you know, you're not paying attention, or whatever. You know, we're not talking about the big things like that. We're talking about, and I'll read you some examples later. We're talking about, you know, when sights come off and you don't have another one, when you walk into the restaurant and the cartridge is empty. You know, you don't have a backup plan immediately. When you're dealing with caregivers who are not perfect. Stuff like that. So let's talk about how to get from here, which is where most of us are at diagnosis, right? Oh my God, what are we going to do? To how we get to here, right? And I do think, I love the superhero capes in the background here. I do think that recognizing mistakes as a secret superpower is a really cool way of looking at this. So let's go through how to get there, and then I'll tell you about some of the mistakes that we've made. Okay. So the first thing you want to do is acknowledge and articulate, wow, there's a typo and there's spacing issues. Oh my gosh, don't pay attention. Acknowledge and articulate your fear to your health team, not to social media. And this is really important because we want to spell out what's bothering us. But sometimes it can be very difficult to do so. And I mean your deepest, darkest fears about diabetes. Have you seen, okay, so let me give you two examples about this. So I usually talk about Voldemort, right? Because in the Harry Potter books, nobody's supposed to say his name. And as soon as you say his name, things change, right? Harry Potter says his name, he's afraid, but he confronts it and moves on. And also in the Mr. Rogers movie, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, and I used to say this all the time, but I hadn't remembered it. If you can mention it, you can manage it. And that's what this is all about. If you're worried about something happening to your child while they're asleep, talk to your healthcare provider about that. Get the real scoop. If you're worried about sports, if you're worried about college, talk to your doctor. Don't take those fears to social media. So acknowledge your fear and then talk to your child, because talking to your kids about this can take many forms, right? And I don't mean, oops, I got ahead of myself. Can take many forms because it changes as they get older. But let's focus on, let's say, elementary school, right? And the reason I have this firefighter thing here is because think about how we talk about fire safety with our kids. Now, generally speaking, we don't talk about it. We wait till they come home from school in first or second grade with stuff like this. But what do they talk about? They talk about have a plan, know your exits, right? Figure out in advance, what are we going to do if this happens? Get the adults involved. Here's what you do. You know what they don't do at school? They don't show you the aftermath of fires. They don't show you what could happen if you don't follow the plan. And I'm going to be explicit here, so I don't know if kids are watching, but they don't show you the burned bodies. And I think that's really important because all that's going to do is scare people. It doesn't help you educate. And I bring that up because a lot of people, very well-meaning people, don't think about making a plan for diabetes, don't think about how to communicate with their child about diabetes. They think about, I'm going to show them what's going to happen if they don't take care of themselves. And that's just not helpful. And educators know that, which is why they do it this way. Okay, the next step is to listen to your child. Listen to what your child has to say. And this is different from talking, right? We want to listen to our kids. I don't know about your kids. My kids always want to talk to me at 10 o'clock at night. I used to do morning radio and I had to get up at 3:30, but never failed. 9 o'clock at night, whatever their bedtime was, 8:30, it didn't matter. Whatever their bedtime was, that's when they wanted to talk. That's when you have to do it. But an example for this is, Benny said to me at one point, we were having a lot of trouble getting his blood sugar down. You know, there were many factors happening, but he was over 300 for a long time. And it was very difficult. And he said, well, what if I don't come down ever? And I really had to listen, because I don't think at that moment he was asking about the number. I think he was asking about his fears with diabetes, right? What happens if something is really wrong with me? And I was able to go through, we'd been dealing with it for 8 years at this point, if not longer. And I was able to say, well, this has never happened before. We would talk to Dr. Vanderwell. We would talk to our healthcare providers. We would figure it out step by step. And listening to his fears was a way to bring into that conversation some other information that really helped him at that time and beyond. He knew it wasn't just me and him. We have a whole team around us to help. And that made him feel a lot better. And of course, we figured it out and went on from there. It was one of those weird times where we never really have problems with bad insulin with heat, but we think it was a question from summer camp to home, and then we left the places and that sort of thing. But we did figure it out and we were able to move on. Okay, decide to say yes. I totally stole this from my friend Maura McCarthy. She is the author of Raising Teens with Diabetes. Her blog is Despite Diabetes, and many of you know who she is. I am sure in her presentations she doesn't have this weird spacing problem that cropped up for me. I'm blaming PowerPoint. But so she says decide to say yes. And this is if you're dealing with diabetes and questions that come up. If you would say yes without diabetes, you must find a way to say yes with diabetes. So if that's a sleepover, if you don't do sleepovers without diabetes, in real life, then why do them with diabetes? But if you do sleepovers for your older children, starting at age 7, like we did, you got to find a way to do it for the younger children. And if you think about it that way, it really helps change the conversation in your head, the one we have with ourselves, right? Like, I could never do this. Yes, you can. You have to figure out a way. Is it more of a pain? Is it more of a burden? Or do you have to do more work? Sometimes, but it's totally worth doing. And then connect. And this is my favorite always. I love to connect with people. I hope we can stay connected in this crazy time when we're connected by Zoom and my terrible PowerPoint presentations. But connect, right? And you're here, you're doing that. You're already connecting, even if it's just connecting with me today. Other great ways to do it in person are with camp, Friends for Life, the diabetes conferences held by children with diabetes, the virtual conferences like this, JDRF walks. And then this one with everybody outside is with a group called the Maine Pea Pods. And this is a group in Maine. One of the last talks I gave in person before all this happened. They're a wonderful group of people who got together and made it happen for them. So there are a lot of ways to connect. My other presentation, Diabetes Connections, is all about that, so I won't go through it here. But this is a really important way to know that you and your child are supported, to give you more confidence, to fail and make mistakes, and to learn that lots of people are just like you and are making these same mistakes. All right, so this is Benny. Back in the day, I thought he would never get rid of that pacifier, but he certainly did. Boy, he was, I shouldn't tell you these embarrassing stories, but we were going to get rid of the pacifier when he turned 2. And then he got diabetes before he turned 2, and we were like, you can keep it till college, we don't care. But of course, he did not. And this is him now. He just got his permit. Woohoo! So he's been driving a lot, which I cannot believe. But I do this to show you that while I am the world's worst, we are making it through. And I think it's because of the worst stuff that he is independent, he is responsible, and he's very confident. And I hope that the next time you get an A1C, whether it's in range or higher or lower than you would like, and everybody just laughed because who has an A1C that's lower than they would like? But sometimes as we get older, they like the A1C to be a little higher, but you do not feel judged. That instead you feel super powerful. Da, da, da. Okay, so part of this presentation is me reading from The World's Worst Diabetes Mom. So this is the very shameless plug. I will put it in like that. Boy, this is strange new territory. I'm not even sure how to get myself back to here. Okay. Stop. There we go. Hey, I'm a technical genius. So let me read you a little bit of The World's Worst Diabetes Mom, because hopefully what I talked about, that's all set up, right? That's all to help us feel more comfortable making these mistakes. So here are some of our mistakes. All right, this is chapter 11, The Beach. Boy, this is interesting reading just on Zoom. We'll see how this goes. We take a family vacation to the beach at least once a year. Sand and surf mean taking some care with Benny's insulin pump, but we got used to that pretty quickly. In fact, by 2010, when this episode took place, I thought we had beach time under control. Oops, diabetes is just full of surprises. We packed up the kids in the car and headed back to our favorite place, Isle of Palms, South Carolina. We hit the beach before we even unpacked, the kids splashing in the waves, a family walk on the sand, digging holes and building castles. Exactly what we go there for. I felt my blood pressure go down just watching the ocean meet the shore. At this time, we were using the Animas insulin pump, which was waterproof, but we almost always took it off while swimming and always in the ocean. That night, we headed to dinner straight from the beach. We didn't even change, just threw some dry cover-ups on over our suits. Isle of Palms is that kind of place. We always go to Luke and Ollie's, a fun, casual place. My husband has known the owner since their days at summer camp together in New York. We ordered and then took out all the diabetes stuff to dose. Benny tried to reconnect his pump and realized he couldn't. The tubing end just wouldn't go back into the inset. We couldn't get it to click into place. Slade took a look and realized the inset was full of sand. I immediately knew what happened and felt my heart sink because I also immediately knew I could have prevented it. All tubed pumps come with this little piece that you click in when you disconnect the tubing for bathing or swimming. We had used it once or twice, but didn't see the point. We never had any trouble before, and I knew I would just lose the tiny clip-in. Now, at the beach with a suit full of sand, I got it. Of course, we didn't bring any little click-in thingies with us. With dinner already ordered, we talked about alternatives to simply changing the inset. We had all our supplies with us, but Benny was very reluctant at that age about any extra shots or inset changes. Could we dump water on it and rinse the sand out? We poured a bottle of water on it, but that didn't wash enough sand out. Years later, we did have success with that. What, you think this is the only time we forgot? But that was in the shower, not something we had access to in the restaurant. We ended up changing Benny's inset before dinner arrived, but then had the issue of knowing we were just at the start of our beach vacation with no thingies. I believe they are called pump clips, if you want to get technical. I was stumped, but Slade came up with a great idea. Did I say Slade is my husband? Slade is my husband. Since the clip is basically the same thing that's at the end of pump tubing, why not just use that? We changed the tubing every 3 days, and I brought extras. He cut off the tubing from the old inset we just changed, leaving a few inches dangling from the end. He tied a knot, and ta-da, new pump clip. It wasn't pretty. Benny had a little bit of extra tubing and a little knot sticking up like a bump, but my kids wore rash shirts at that age, so it was covered. Besides, Benny didn't really care as long as he knew he could play on the beach and jump through the waves. Side note, I did not stop at that time to think about what the other people in the restaurant must have thought. We were at an outside table jumping around, pouring water down our son's bathing suit. A couple of thoughts here. If that had happened today, we would simply have given Benny a shot and moved on. One of the worst things I did for real, out of ignorance, was to stop doing shots entirely when we switched to a pump. I would highly advise you keep insulin shots, pen or syringe, in your repertoire. Otherwise, you may find your child, like mine, forgets that they weren't really bothered by shots and becomes terrified of them. So I go through in this chapter about how Benny kind of got over that fear. He was in an age where it worked out for him and wanted to take a pump break. I go through some of doctor level advice about disconnecting and reconnecting at the beach. And then, now that Benny is comfortable with shots again, we throw an insulin pen into his backup bag. If he runs out of insulin in his pump or there's a question about the inset, he can decide to take a shot. He can also, and this will make some people cringe as it is not FDA approved, pull the insulin out of the pen to use in a pump cartridge. Once you do that, though, you can't use the pen for shots. Pulling the insulin out results in air being pulled into the pen, which can affect dosing. I always write the no good date on the pen with a Sharpie, and when it gets close to 28 days, we make sure to use it. By the way, isn't 28 Days Later a zombie movie? I always picture zombie insulin marching around if I miss the date. Then I go through the beach again, some stuff on overlay patches and getting things to stick. Okay. I've shared the knot in the tubing trick quite a few times since then with families who also had no idea what those little pitchfork things are. For a while, I traveled with 2 pump clips in Benny's meter case, and after that trip, they were always in our swim bag. But that first time, as usual, we figured it out. With a plan in place and insulin delivered, we enjoyed dinner and that great sleep I seemed to only get at the beach. For the rest of our trip, we worried less about diabetes and spent more time teaching the kids to fly kites and boogie board. It was a great vacation. If you're ever in Isle of Palms, check out Luke and Ollie's. Make sure to ask Jonathan about his big win on The Price is Right. That is how he opened the restaurant. You could also ask to see the office/closet where we changed Benny's site, but that's not on the menu. So that is one of many, many mistakes I allude to in the book. Others include when Benny changed his pump inset himself and his pump cartridge for the first time and did not remove the pump from his body to do so. That was a good one. We talk about travel. We talk about when my toddler daughter insisted on being wanded at TSA long ago. Goodness, that was the worst because the TSA lady was having none of us, and I'm surprised we did not end up in TSA jail. Lots of mistakes with diabetes. But as I said in the presentation, making mistakes is really the best way to learn. You can't get there, though, if you don't have confidence in your diabetes and parenting management. And let's face it, parenting a child with diabetes is really hard. But part of that, we have to acknowledge, is because parenting is hard, right? You never reach a point in regular parenting where somebody says, you did it right, good job, way to go, right? We have milestones along the way, but I'm almost 50, and I guarantee you my mom is still checking in on me, and she's still questioning if I make a decision that she thinks is bonkers. She probably thinks to herself, was that something I did? It never ends. Any type of parenting, right? We just want to do right by our kids. And I do think it's really important to give them the confidence to grow up and to get out. And I'm only half kidding about that. But I hope some of the advice that I talked about today really helps. I'd love to hear more from you. This is very strange to wrap up a presentation without a Q&A, without some feedback. But I promise you, your kids are doing great. You're going to be okay. Don't look at that A1C as a report card. Even, a bad number, and we're not supposed to put emotions on numbers, I get it. But sometimes bad numbers are very good information. So if we can turn it around and look at it that way, I think it can really help. Do you have a world's worst story? I know it's not exactly interactive, but I'd love to hear from you. Tell me about your mistakes. You can email them in. I don't know, maybe CWD will give us a chat or someplace we can share these stories. But you're not alone. We're all the world's worst. We're all just trying our best. Thanks so much. I'm Stacey Sims.